My husband, Frank, died on a Tuesday in April. He left me our cozy little house in Sarasota, a respectable pension, and 26 years of peaceful, sun-drenched memories. But he also left behind the one thing we never, ever talked about, his family's 100-acre farm back in Fairfield County, Ohio. Frank hadn't set foot on it since the year before we married, and his only explanation was a quiet, pained line about a falling out with his brother, Mark. I loved Frank, so I respected his silence. Now, sorting through the lockbox where he kept our important papers, I found a heavy, rusted skeleton key taped to the back of a faded photograph. In the picture, two young boys in denim overalls stood proudly in front of a magnificent red barn. A note in Frank's familiar, steady scrawl was attached. For Clara, it's all yours now. Forgive me. Forgive him for what? The question was still echoing in my heart a week later when my brother-in-law, Mark, called. His voice was thick, with a sympathy that felt thin and rehearsed. He told me how sorry he was, how Frank had been suffering in silence for years, a claim that was utterly untrue. Then he got to the point. He was selling the farm. He explained that Frank had signed the deed over to him years ago in a simple gentleman's agreement to make things easier. All he needed, he said, was my signature on one final transfer confirmation form to satisfy the title company. That's when a small, cold alarm bell started ringing in the back of my mind. The man on the phone wasn't just a stranger to me. He was a liar. And he wasn't just trying to steal a piece of property. He was trying to erase the last piece of my husband's history. And I was about to find out his lies were rooted deeper than I could ever imagine. Before we continue, please subscribe, tap like, and tell me what city you're watching from in the comments. I told Mark I would need some time to look through Frank's paperwork and call him back. His tone shifted instantly, just a fraction of a degree from syrupy condolence to sharp irritation. Clara, there's really nothing to look at. It's all standard. Frank and I had this worked out. Our lawyer, Mr. Henderson, has it all ready to file. The buyers are getting anxious. He was pushing hard. Frank was a man who laminated the maintenance schedule for our lawnmower. He kept every single receipt for every major purchase we ever made, filed by year in a series of sturdy accordion folders. The idea that he would handle his family's century-old farm with a verbal agreement and no records was ludicrous. He always told me, Clara, if someone rushes you to sign something, that's your signal to stop, sit down, and read every single word. So I did more than that. I spent the rest of the day going through the lockbox again, then the file cabinet in his office, then the boxes of old papers in the attic. There was nothing. No deed, no tax bills, no letters from Mark, no mention of a farm in Ohio anywhere. It was as if the place and his entire family had been surgically removed from our life together. And yet there was the key, a big old-fashioned thing, heavy and real in my hand. And that note, it's all yours now. He wouldn't have written that if he'd given it away. 2 days later, a thick FedEx envelope arrived. Inside was the form Mark wanted me to sign, along with a ridiculously cheerful, bubbly note from a woman named Brenda. She introduced herself as Mark's partner and a family friend who was helping him with the sale. She wrote about how much Frank had loved Mark, and the sale would finally give Mark the security he deserved after looking after the farm all these years. It was all so cloying and manipulative. I tossed the letter in the trash and booked a flight to Columbus. I needed to see this place. I needed to stand on the land my husband came from and figure out why he ran away from it and why his brother was so desperate to get my name on a dotted line. The farm was a 40-minute drive from the airport down winding country roads where the spring corn was already knee-high. The GPS told me to turn onto a gravel driveway nearly swallowed by overgrown forsythia bushes. And there it was. A simple, 2-story white farmhouse stood tired and peeling under the Ohio sun. But the barn was just like in the picture, a grand, beautiful structure, its red paint faded, but still proud. This was where Frank grew up. As I stepped out of my rental car, a woman came walking over from the neighboring property. She was in her late 50s with platinum blonde hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must be Clara," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness.
I'm Brenda, Mark's Brenda. I live right next door. We are just so sorry for your loss. Frank was a wonderful man.
It was the woman from the letter. She gave me a tour, pointing out the features of the farmhouse with a practiced real estate agent flair. She talked about the new roof Mark had put on a few years back, the well pump he'd replaced. She painted a picture of Mark as the dutiful, responsible brother who had shouldered the entire burden of the family legacy while Frank was off living the good life in Florida. When I asked about looking inside the barn, her smile tightened. "Oh, there's nothing in there, hun. Just a bunch of rusty old junk. Mark keeps it locked up tight. Kids, you know, it's a liability issue." Red flag number 2. I spent the rest of the afternoon in the Fairfield County Recorder of Deeds office. I've learned in my 68 years that a polite gray-haired lady in a cardigan can often get more information than a team of lawyers. I told the clerk my husband had passed away and I was simply trying to organize his estate. The clerk, a kind soul named Pat, typed Frank's name into her computer. "Okay, here we go," she said, turning her monitor for me to see. "The property at 1140 Mudhouse Road. It shows a transfer via quitclaim deed to Mark Allenby." My heart hammered against my ribs. Pat continued, "The transfer was recorded on July 16th, 5 years ago. 5 years ago. The world tilted slightly. Frank and I were on an anniversary cruise to Alaska 5 years ago. I knew the exact date because it was the day we saw a pod of orcas right off the bow of the ship. There was no earthly way he was in Ohio signing a deed. Could I please get a copy of that deed?" I asked, my voice barely a whisker. Pat nodded, printed it out, and slid it across the counter. I stared at it, my hand shaking. There was Frank's name signed on the bottom line. It was a good forgery, but it wasn't his. Frank's signature was a fast, impatient scrawl. This signature was careful, deliberate. It was the signature of someone concentrating very hard on copying something. And below it, the seal and signature of a notary public. Janice Higgins. The notarization was dated July 14th. I pulled out my phone and scrolled back through my camera roll. July 14th, 5 years ago? There was a photo of Frank and me bundled up in parkas standing on the deck of the ship. Behind us, the magnificent blue-white wall of the Hubbard Glacier. He was 3,000 miles away. I had him. I had proof of a crime. That evening, my righteous anger fueled me. I drove to the town where the notary Janice Higgins had her office, a small shipping and mailbox store in a tired strip mall. A bell chimed when I walked in. The woman behind the counter looked exhausted. "Are you Janice Higgins?" I asked. She nodded, wary. I showed her the copy of the deed. I explained, very calmly, that my husband had been in Alaska on the date of the notarization, and I was simply trying to organize his estate. The clerk, a kind soul named Pat, went chalk white. I don't remember every single signing," she stammered, her eyes darting around the shop. "It was 5 years ago." "A notary is required by law to keep a journal," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "It would show the person's name, what ID they presented. I just need to see the entry for this transaction. It's to sort out a family misunderstanding." Her facade began to crumble. She knew I had her. "Look," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Mark Allenby, he comes in here. His partner, Brenda, too. They're important in town. He told me his brother was very sick, couldn't leave the house, and had sent him with the signed paper. He said it was just a family thing.
Brenda was with him, she cooed about how they were just trying to help poor sick Frank. Her eyes filled with tears. I know it was wrong. I shouldn't have done it, but they put so much pressure on me. She had not only admitted to a crime, but she had also placed Brenda at the scene, an active participant in the fraud. This wasn't just my sleazy brother-in-law. It was a conspiracy between the two of them. What on earth was in that barn that was worth all this? Stay till the end. I'll show the truth. That night I couldn't sleep. The image of the locked barn filled my mind. I drove back out there, parking my car down the road and walking up the gravel drive under the cover of darkness. The night was filled with the sound of crickets and the smell of damp earth. Using the heavy skeleton key from Frank's lockbox, I went to the small, man-sized door on the side of the barn, hidden behind a thicket of overgrown raspberry bushes. I slid the key into the old, rusted lock. With a groan of metal, it turned. The door swung inward into a blackness that smelled of hay, damp soil, and something else. A faint chemical smell. I stepped inside, my phone's flashlight cutting a nervous beam through the immense silent space. The main area was filled with the ghosts of a working farm. A hulking rust pot tractor and an old hay rake and piles of equipment shrouded in tarps like sleeping giants. But against the far wall was something that didn't belong. It was a section of the barn that was been crudely walled off with new unpainted plywood and 2x4s. It was a large windowless room built inside the larger structure, and the new door on it was secured with not one, but 2 heavy-duty modern padlocks.
My heart pounded. This was what Brenda and Mark were hiding. This was the liability issue. I walked around the makeshift room, running my hand over the fresh wood. As my light beam traveled up the wall, it caught something. A power cable, thick as my wrist, snaked out from a high-up gap in the plywood and ran across the barn's rafters to a brand-new, industrial-sized circuit breaker panel that had been installed on the main wall. The electric meter on the outside of the barn must be spinning like a top. Whatever was in that room was using a massive amount of power. Frustrated, I started looking for anything else that was out of place. Tucked away under a dusty workbench, I found a pile of recently discarded trash. I knelt down, pulling out crumpled papers. The first was a receipt from an agricultural supply store in Columbus. It was for a dozen 50-pound bags of a specialized fertilizer blend, the kind designed for high-yield indoor horticulture. My breath caught in my throat. Then I found another receipt from an electrical supplier for high-intensity grow lamps and industrial ventilation bands. It was starting to add up, and it was making me sick. Then I found something else. It was an old steamer trunk shoved deep under a rotting canvas tarp. It wasn't locked. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, it was filled with old quilts and linens, smelling of mothballs. But beneath them, I found what I was truly looking for. It wasn't evidence of Mark's crimes, but a window into my husband's heart. There were stacks of journals, bound in cheap leather, filled with the elegant looping script of Frank's mother. I took one out, sat on the cold concrete floor of the barn, and began to read. For hours, I sat there, transported back in time. My mother-in-law's words painted a heartbreaking picture of a family torn apart by one son's greed and the other's quiet decency. Mark had always been a problem.
The journals were filled with stories of his petty cruelties, his pathological lying, his endless schemes to get money from his parents. He'd stolen from them, forged their checks, and bled them dry with his gambling debts and failed business ideas. Frank, my Frank, had been the good son, the steady one, the one who worked from dawn till dusk, always trying to fix the things Mark broke, always trying to protect his parents. The final entry I read that night was dated 27 years ago, just a few months before Frank and I met. His mother wrote about her deepest shame. Mark had convinced his aging father to sign some papers, telling them they were for a government farm subsidy. They were actually loan documents, using the farm as collateral. Mark took the $250,000 loan and disappeared. When the bank sent a foreclosure notice, his father had a massive stroke. Frank had worked 3 jobs for 2 years, selling off equipment and a parcel of their land to pay off the fraudulent loan and save the farm. He had saved his family's home, but his father never fully recovered, and his relationship with his brother was shattered beyond repair. He left Ohio a month later, vowing never to return. He hadn't run from responsibility. He had run from a trauma so deep he could never bring himself to speak of it. He had carried that weight alone for all these years to give me a life free of that darkness. And now his predatory brother was trying to steal the very farm Frank had sacrificed everything to save. A cold, hard resolve settled over me. This wasn't just about a forged deed anymore. This was for Frank. The next morning, armed with the new, much deeper understanding of the man I was dealing with, I drove to the agricultural supply store listed on the fertilizer receipt. I walked in, playing the part of a slightly confused grandmotherly type. I told the young man at the counter that my nephew was getting into serious tomato gardening in his basement, and that I wanted to get him some supplies as a gift. I described the kind of high-intensity lights I had seen on the other receipt. The young man, whose name tag read Cody, was incredibly helpful. "Oh yeah," he said with a knowing grin. "You're talking about a professional setup. We sell a lot of that stuff. Just had a guy in here a few months back, bought enough to light up a football field. An older fella, drives a big new pickup truck. Cleared us out of our best soil mix, too."
I leaned in, feigning excitement. "Oh, that sounds just like my nephew's friend. I think his name is Mark." Cody's eyes lit up. "That's him, Mark Allenby. He said he was renovating his family's old barn, a real big spender." He'd not only confirmed Mark's purchases, but he'd also confirmed the location. Another puzzle piece clicked into place. I thanked Cody for his time, bought a small bag of potting soil to keep up my cover, and walked out with a smile on my face. Mark wasn't just a forger, he was a careless braggart. My next move was risky. I needed to rattle them. Brenda had been texting me daily, little poison-laced drops of fake concern. "Hope you're doing okay, hun. Just checking in. Let us know if you need anything. The buyers are getting so antsy. They really want to close by the end of the month." I responded to her latest text. "Doing much better now, thank you. I finally got Frank's old laptop working. It's amazing what a man keeps on his computer. So many financial records and emails. I'm having my tech guy in Florida do a full data recovery just to be safe. You can't be too careful these days." It was a complete and total bluff. Frank's laptop was on my desk in Sarasota, powered off. But I knew it would send them into a tailspin. People with secrets hate the idea of a digital ghost. That evening, Brenda invited me to dinner at her house. "Just a simple home-cooked meal," she'd cooed over the phone. "You look like you could use one." It was clearly a trap, an ambush designed to get me to let my guard down and sign the papers. I accepted.
I walked into her meticulously clean house, which smelled of lemon polish and roasted chicken. Mark was there, looking tense. He put on a show of being the gracious host, but his eyes were like little black stones. All through dinner, they circled me like sharks, asking casual questions about Frank's health, his finances, what his final wishes were. "It's funny," I said, taking a bite of potato. "Frank kept such incredible records of everything. Spreadsheets for its pension, for our investments. He even had a file for every time he loaned his brother money, going back 30 years, with the interest calculated and everything." Mark's fork clattered onto his plate. Brenda's smile froze on her face. I knew my bluff about the laptop had hit home. They spent the rest of the meal trying to convince me that any records of old family loans were just misunderstandings, that Frank was confused in his later years. It was a pathetic, transparent performance. I left their house feeling energized. I had them scared, and scared people make mistakes. The mistake came sooner than I expected. When I returned to my motel room that night, the door was slightly ajar. My heart leapt into my throat. Inside, the room had been tossed. My suitcase was open on the bed, my clothes pulled out. The drawers of the desk were open. They hadn't been gentle, but they hadn't taken anything. My wallet was on the nightstand, cash still inside. My rental car keys were there. They had been looking for something specific. The laptop. They had swallowed my bait, hook, line, and sinker. I immediately picked up the phone and dialed 911 to report a break-in. A local sheriff's deputy came and took a full report, noting the forced entry. The official police report was the final piece of evidence I needed. Keep watching. There will be justice. The next morning, I walked into the Fairfield County Sheriff's Office and asked for Detective Miller, the supervising detective for the district. I sat down in his office and calmly laid out the entire story, piece by piece in chronological order. I started with the phone call from Mark. I gave him the forged quitclaim deed. I showed him the vacation photo from Alaska. I told him about my conversation with the terrified notary, Janice Higgins, and her implication of Brenda. I gave him the receipts from the barn, the name of the clerk at the agricultural supply store, and finally, the case number from the police report for the break-in at my motel room the night before. I slid the folder across his desk. They're desperate. And I believe they're hiding a major illegal operation in that barn. I think they broke into my room looking for a laptop they believe contains evidence of their fraud. Detective Miller, a man who looked like he'd seen it all, listened without interruption. He examined the deed and the photograph, his expression grim. He read the motel break-in report. When he looked up, his eyes were serious. "Miss Allenby," he said, "this is one of the most well-documented cases of fraud I've ever seen a civilian bring in. The deed and your alibi are damning. The notary's expected confession will give us probable cause. The break-in shows consciousness of guilt. You have done excellent work." He picked up his phone. "We're going to pay Miss Higgins a visit. And then I think we're going to get a judge to sign a search warrant."
2 days later, Detective Miller called me at my motel. "We got it," he said. "The notary gave a full confession, on the record. The judge signed the warrant for the farm an hour ago. We have a team hitting it now." He called back again in the late afternoon. "You were right about everything, ma'am. It was a massive, illegal marijuana grow operation. Sophisticated, professional. One of the biggest we've ever found in this part of the state." He continued, "We arrested Mark Allenby an hour ago at his partner's residence. We arrested her, too. We found drafts of the sale contract on her laptop.
Turns out Brenda is a licensed realtor. She was knowingly facilitating the sale of a criminal enterprise. We got them for forgery, conspiracy, property fraud, drug manufacturing, the whole 9 yards. The relief that washed over me was so powerful, I had to sit down. It was over. With the criminal case underway, I hired a sharp local lawyer to handle the civil side. It was a simple matter for the court to issue a summary judgment that voided the fraudulent deed, officially and forever restoring the title of the farm to Frank's estate, and therefore to me. After the property was cleared as a crime scene, I was finally able to explore it freely. And that's when I discovered Frank's real secret. It wasn't a secret of shame, it was a secret of love. Tucked away in the back corner of the barn under a thick, dusty canvas tarp that even the police hadn't bothered with, was the gleaming chassis of a 1967 Ford Mustang. It was half restored, its cherry red paint job covered in a fine layer of dust. Frank's mother had written about this car in her journals. It was his high school passion project, the thing he'd poured all his time and love into before Mark's betrayals had forced him to leave it all behind. Tucked in the glove box with a faded photo of a 17-year-old Frank, grinning proudly, grease on his cheek. This was the real inheritance. This was the part of himself he'd left behind. Don't click away, he'll get what's coming. I sold our house in Sarasota. The memories were beautiful, but they belonged to another life. I moved to the farm. I used the proceeds from the Florida house and a portion of Frank's life insurance to pay off the secret liens Mark had taken out against the property and to begin the slow process of bringing the place back to life. I hired a local crew to repaint the house a warm, buttery yellow and put a new tin roof on the barn. I found an elderly mechanic named Gus, who, it turned out, had been friends with Frank in high school. He remembered the Mustang. Together, over the course of a year, we finished the restoration. The day Gus and I fired up the engine for the first time, its deep, rumbling roar echoing in the barn, I cried. It felt like Frank's heart was beating again. Mark and Brenda both took plea bargains. Mark got 7 years in state prison. Brenda got 3. And she lost her real estate license forever. The news felt distant to me, an echo from a life I'd already left behind. My new life was about the tangible things, the feel of rich soil in my hands as I planted my first real garden, the taste of the first ripe tomato, the satisfaction of seeing the farmhouse glowing with light in the evenings. I started a small quilting circle with women from the local church, and we meet every Thursday in my dining room. I adopted a rescue dog, a scruffy terrier I named Frank. He follows me everywhere. Last fall, I hosted a harvest festival for the community right here on the farm. We had hay rides, a chili cook-off, and a local bluegrass band that played in the open bay of the big red barn. Seeing a barn, once a place of crime and secrets, now filled with laughter, music, and light, felt like a final victory. Driving that restored Mustang down the country roads with the windows down and my dog Frank's ears flapping in the wind, I feel a sense of peace I never knew was possible. For anyone out there, especially women of my generation who suddenly find their world turned upside down, listen to me. Your grief may feel you fragile, but you are forged from something stronger than steel. Do not be intimidated. Do not be rushed. Trust that quiet voice inside you that says, wait a minute, this isn't right. Your greatest strength is the wisdom you've earned over a lifetime. Frank, in his quiet way, tried to protect me from his past, but in the end, he gave me the key to my own future. He led me back to a home I'd never known, and in saving his legacy, I found I was also saving myself. This is just my personal experience, shared for awareness and entertainment.
Your watch to the end. Click here. You will hear another story from my grandma.